A single family sits down to dinner. 4 generations at one table. A great-grandmother, a grandfather, a mother, a teenager scrolling his phone. To the eye, it looks like any family dinner. But in 3 of these families, something invisible is happening. There's a trust document drafted in 1962, quietly compounding in the background. There's a piece of land nobody's allowed to sell until 2071. There's a rule, unspoken but absolute, that the teenager on his phone will not touch $1 of real capital until he passes a test nobody told him he was taking. Most families plan for next year. Some families plan for the next decade. But there is a small, quiet class of families who have spent centuries, not years, centuries, building systems designed to outlive everyone currently alive to benefit from them. They are not smarter than everyone else. They are not luckier than everyone else, though luck plays its part. What they have is a completely different relationship with time. This isn't hidden, it's just never taught. Today we're breaking down the 15 operating principles that let old money families think in centuries while everyone else thinks in quarters. The governance structures, the psychological training, the legal architecture, and the uncomfortable trade-offs nobody puts in the brochure. The time horizon problem. Principle 1. The family is the asset, not the money. Here's the first mental flip that separates dynastic wealth from merely large wealth. The money is not the thing being protected. The family's capacity to steward money is the thing being protected. This sounds like a semantic distinction. It isn't. If you think the money is the asset, your strategy is entirely defensive. Lock it up, minimize risk, hide it from taxes and lawsuits. If you think the family's capability is the asset, your strategy becomes generative. You invest in educating heirs. You build governance systems that can survive incompetent or disengaged descendants. And you treat the money as a renewable output of a well-run system, rather than a finite pool to be guarded. Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's framework is useful here. Financial capital is only one of several capitals a family can hold. Cultural capital, taste, education, the unconscious fluency in how institutions work, and social capital, the network of relationships that open doors, are the actual load-bearing structures. Money that isn't backed by cultural and social capital tends to evaporate within a generation or two, because the person holding it doesn't know how to make decisions that preserve it. Money that is backed by those capitals tends to regenerate even after catastrophic loss, because the family retains the knowledge, relationships, and behavioral patterns that created the wealth in the first place. This is why old money families obsess over things that look, from the outside, like they have nothing to do with money: which schools children attend, which social circles they're introduced into, which internships or apprenticeships they complete before touching family capital. It isn't snobbery for its own sake. It's capital formation of a different kind. Principle 2. Stewardship beats ownership. The second principle follows directly from the first. In families built for the long run, individual members are trained to see themselves not as owners of the family's wealth, but as temporary stewards of it, custodians holding an asset in trust for people who haven't been born yet. This isn't a metaphor in the legal sense either. It's frequently the literal legal structure. Assets are held in trusts, foundations, or private trust companies where no single living person has unilateral control. The current generation can use the wealth within defined parameters, but they cannot dismantle it because the legal architecture was built by someone who is no longer alive to be argued with. The psychological effect of stewardship framing is significant. an owner asks, "What do I want to do with this?" A steward asks, "What obligations came with this, and what will the next steward need?" Behavioral economists have long observed that people discount future value more heavily than they should, a phenomenon called hyperbolic discounting. Stewardship structures are, in effect, an institutional workaround for a known flaw in individual human psychology. You don't ask each generation to be more disciplined than the last. You build a system that doesn't require them to be. If this reframe, family as the asset, not the money, is new to you, this channel exists to map the rest of this architecture in full. Subscribe, because every video builds on the last one, and we're about to get into the legal instruments that make stewardship enforceable, not just aspirational. The governance layer principle. 3. Written governance over verbal understanding. Every family has unwritten rules. Old money families write them down. The instrument is usually called a family constitution, sometimes a family charter, sometimes a statement of family values, but functionally the same document. It typically covers the family's mission and values, the criteria for entering leadership roles, the process for resolving disputes, the conditions under which a family member can be bought out or excluded, and the rules governing marriage, divorce, and outside spouses' access to information or capital. Why does this matter for multi-generational thinking specifically? Because verbal agreements die with the people who made them. A grandfather's understanding of "we take care of family first" is not transferable. His grandchildren have to reconstruct it from memory and hearsay, and reconstruction drift. A written constitution, reviewed and re-ratified by each generation, transfers the actual logic, not just a folk memory of it. We covered the mechanics of this in our Family Constitutions episode, the specific clauses that hold up in court and the ones that don't. Worth watching after this one if you haven't already. Principle 4. The trust as a time machine. A trust is, functionally, a message sent forward through time with legal teeth. The person who creates it, the grantor, can encode instructions that bind behavior for decades, or, in some jurisdictions, centuries after their death. This is where dynastic trusts become relevant. In jurisdictions that have abolished or extended the rule against perpetuities, a centuries-old legal doctrine that historically prevented trusts from controlling assets indefinitely, families can create structures designed to last hundreds of years. South Dakota, Nevada, and Delaware in the U.S. are commonly used for this because they've extended or eliminated perpetuity limits domestically. What can a trust actually control from beyond the grave? Distribution schedules. No principal until age 35. Income only until then. Incentive clauses. Distributions matched to earned income, capped at $150,000 per year. And protective provisions that shield assets from a beneficiary's future creditors, divorces, or poor decisions. The grantor is, in effect, legislating for descendants they'll never meet, based on values they hope will still be relevant in 100 years, which is itself a bet, and not always a correct one. Rigid trusts written for one era can become straitjackets in another. We'll get to that tension later in this video. Building the human, not just the portfolio. Principle 5. Human capital is funded before financial capital is released. Old money families that survive past the third generation almost always follow a sequencing rule. Competence is built before capital is deployed. This is the inversion of how most wealth transfer actually happens in newly wealthy families, where a lump sum arrives at 18 or 21, and the recipient is left to figure out stewardship after the fact. often after damage is done. In dynastic families, this typically looks like layered exposure. Children learn to budget an allowance with real consequences before they learn about compound interest. Teenagers sit in on simplified family meetings before they have voting rights. Young adults are frequently required to hold outside jobs, unrelated to family business, before they're allowed to manage family capital. Precisely so, their sense of competence isn't entangled with unearned money. We built out the full mechanics of this, the specific rules, ages, and milestones, in our episode on old money financial habits for children, and it's a useful companion piece to this one. Principle 6. Controlled failure is a feature, not a bug. Here's a principle that seems counterintuitive until you sit with it. Many of these families deliberately allow young heirs to fail at small, bounded stakes, because uncontrolled failure at large stakes is the far bigger risk. Consider a composite example based on patterns common across several family office case studies. A family gives a 24-year-old heir a discretionary $50,000 to invest however they choose, fully separated from the family's core capital, with the explicit understanding that losing all of it teaches a lesson worth far more than $50,000. If the heir blows it on a bad speculative bet, the lesson lands while the stakes are still recoverable, and, critically, while there's still a support structure to help them process what went wrong. Compare that to a family that hands a 24-year-old $10 million with no prior exposure to loss. The first real mistake there can be catastrophic, both financially and psychologically. This is sometimes called the black sheep protocol in family governance literature, a formalized process for containing a struggling or high-risk heir's exposure without cutting them off entirely, preserving both the relationship and the balance sheet. We built out the full protocol structure in our dedicated episode on it. Quick gut check in the comments. Does your family operate closer to sink or swim with real money, or controlled failure with training wheels? I read every comment on these videos, and they consistently shape what we cover next. Drop it below. Portfolio architecture across time. Principle 7. Diversification isn't just across assets, it's across time horizons. Modern portfolio theory teaches diversification across asset classes: stocks, bonds, real estate, alternatives. Dynastic families layer a second axis on top of that: diversification across time horizons. A typical multi-generational portfolio isn't one strategy. It's several strategies nested inside each other, each with a different clock. A liquidity sleeve exists to cover near-term needs: taxes, emergencies, opportunistic buys, usually cash and short-duration instruments. A growth sleeve, often public equities and business interests, operates on a 5 to 15-year horizon. A legacy sleeve, land, timber, mineral rights, private equity locked in decade-long fund structures, art, operates on a 20 to 100-year horizon and is often explicitly not expected to be touched by the generation that holds it. This layered structure means a market shock that devastates the growth sleeve doesn't touch the legacy sleeve, and a family can survive a genuinely bad decade without being forced to liquidate the assets that were never meant to be liquidated in the first place. Principle 8. Illiquidity is treated as a virtue, not a flaw. This is one of the more counterintuitive principles for anyone trained in conventional personal finance, where liquidity is almost always framed as safety. Old money families frequently do the opposite. They deliberately lock significant capital into illiquid vehicles: land, private trust company holdings, long-duration private equity, mineral rights. precisely because illiquidity is hard to spend impulsively. We covered this in depth in our land banking and severed mineral rights episode. Land that can't easily be converted to cash can't easily be gambled away by an heir having a bad decade. The friction is the point. A grantor who wants to protect capital from a future beneficiary's poor judgment, addiction, divorce, or simple impulsiveness will often choose the least liquid structure available, not the most efficient one. Optimal portfolio theory would call this inefficient. Multigenerational family governance calls it a feature. The trade-off is real, though, and worth naming honestly. Illiquid structures can trap a family in outdated positions, create genuine hardship if a true emergency arises outside the liquidity sleeve, and occasionally outlive the reason they were created. This is a design tension, not a solved problem. Privacy and professionalization. Principle 9. Privacy is load-bearing infrastructure, not paranoia. We've dedicated entire episodes to this: the stealth wealth audit, the invisible fortress on shelf companies, and corporate privacy. But it's worth restating why privacy specifically supports multi-generational thinking, not just present-day safety. Visible wealth invites present-tense threats. Lawsuits, kidnapping risk in some regions, social engineering, opportunistic marriages, and inflated pricing in every transaction from real estate to renovations. But it also invites a longer horizon threat that's easy to miss. Visible wealth changes how heirs are treated by everyone around them from childhood onward, which shapes who they become before the family has any say in it. Families that keep wealth structurally invisible through trusts, LLCs, and holding structures rather than personal names on titles are protecting not just assets from external threats, but the psychological development of the next generation from a childhood spent as a visible target. Principle 10. The family becomes a professionalized institution. At a certain scale, dynastic families stop operating like families making informal decisions around a dinner table and start operating like institutions, with hired expertise, formal reporting, and structural separation between family and capital. This shows up as the family office, a private, professionally staffed entity handling investment management, tax strategy, philanthropy, and increasingly education and family governance itself. At higher tiers, it shows up as a private trust company, a PTC, where the family effectively owns and operates the corporate trustee that governs their own trusts, giving them more control and continuity than a commercial bank trustee, while still separating day-to-day family dynamics from fiduciary decision-making. We went deep on PTC mechanics in a recent episode, and the short version is this. Professionalization exists specifically to remove single point of failure dependence on any one family member's competence, mood, or life stage. A family office doesn't retire. A family office doesn't have a midlife crisis. A family office remembers decisions made 20 years ago in exact detail. This is the kind of structural thinking most people never get taught. Not because it's secret, but because it's simply never covered in school, in personal finance content, or anywhere else. That's the whole reason this channel exists. If you want the next 15 years of this architecture broken down the same way, subscribe and turn on notifications. We publish on this exact system every week. Alliances and institutions. Principle 11. Marriage and alliance as capital preservation, not just romance historically, and in many old money families still today. Marriage is treated as one of the highest leverage decisions a family makes, not purely romantically, but as a mechanism for either preserving capital or leaking it. This is where prenuptial agreements, marital trusts, and, in some jurisdictions, matrimonial property regimes chosen specifically for asset protection all converge. Sociologist Mark Granovetter's work on network ties is relevant here too. Marriages historically functioned as some of the strongest possible social bridges between family networks, merging not just capital, but connections, reputations, and access. The Rothschild family's historical pattern of intra-family marriage in the 19th century is a well-documented, if unusually aggressive, example of using marriage explicitly to keep both capital and decision-making inside a defined circle. Most modern families don't go nearly that far, but the underlying logic that who you marry is a capital allocation decision, not only a personal one, persists in how prenups are negotiated and how family constitutions treat spousal access to family information and capital. Principle 12. Philanthropy as institution building, not just generosity. Philanthropy in dynastic families frequently serves a second, less obvious function beyond charitable impact. It's a training ground and an institution that outlives the founder. Private foundations require boards, governance, investment committees, and long-term strategic planning, all skills that translate directly to running family capital. Placing younger family members on foundation boards is a low-stakes, reputationally safe way to teach real governance experience before they're handed higher-stakes roles. The Rockefeller family's philanthropic institutions are a well-documented example of philanthropy functioning simultaneously as genuine public good, family identity anchor, and multi-generational training system that has kept descendants engaged with a shared project for well over a century. There's a tax dimension too. Charitable structures can be part of an efficient wealth transfer strategy, but reducing philanthropy to a tax play misses the institutional continuity function, which is often the more durable benefit across generations. Designing for failure. Modes. Principle 13. Built-in checks against a single, bad heir. No family, however well designed, can guarantee every heir will be competent, honest, or stable. Multi-generational families plan for this explicitly rather than hoping around it. Common structural checks include distributed trusteeship, where no single trustee, family or professional, has unilateral authority over major decisions. Independent trust protectors, a role that exists specifically to override or remove a trustee, acting against the trust's purpose, including a family member trustee who's gone rogue. And staggered control, where governance authority transfers gradually across a defined period rather than all at once at a fixed age. The design assumption is not pessimistic exactly, it's actuarial. Across enough generations and enough descendants, the odds that every single heir is well suited to control unrestricted capital approach zero. The system is built to survive the statistically inevitable weak link, not to pretend one won't appear. Principle 14. Redundancy of decision-making power. Related to the above, dynastic families avoid concentrating irreversible decision-making authority in any single living person, no matter how competent that person currently appears. This is standard risk management applied to governance itself. In practice, this looks like requiring multiple signatures or committee approval for major capital decisions, splitting investment authority from distribution authority so the same person or body doesn't control both, and building in mandatory advisory input from outside professionals, estate attorneys, investment committees, sometimes even outside family members who married in, specifically so that no decision of consequence rests on one person's judgment on one particular day. It's the same logic that keeps a company from letting a single executive move billions of dollars alone. Applied to a family, it means the system is resilient to any one member's bad year, bad health, bad divorce, or simple bad judgment. Principle 15. The three-generation curse is treated as a design constraint, not a prophecy. We have to flag something important here, and we flag it every time it comes up on this channel. The commonly cited statistic that 70 to 90% of family fortunes don't survive past the third generation is widely repeated but methodologically contested. The research behind it varies enormously by study, sample, country, and definition of survive, and the number gets passed around far more confidently than the underlying data supports. Treat it as a directional pattern people take seriously, not a precise, settled figure. What's more useful than the statistic itself is why the pattern, whatever its true magnitude, tends to appear at all, a phenomenon sometimes summarized as shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The founding generation builds wealth under scarcity and understands its mechanics intimately. The second generation grows up adjacent to that scarcity, watching it, and often retains a working respect for it, even without having built it themselves. The third generation, by contrast, often grows up with no direct memory of scarcity at all. Wealth is simply the water they swim in. And without deliberate intervention, that's precisely the generation most likely to lose the underlying discipline that created the wealth in the first place. Every principle in this video exists, in one form or another, as a deliberate countermeasure to that pattern. Stewardship framing counters entitlement. Written governance counters memory decay. Human capital investment counters unearned confidence. Controlled failure counters catastrophic failure. Illiquidity counters impulsive spending, and redundant decision-making counters the risk of any single third-generation member torching the whole structure alone. The families who make it to 5, 6, 10 generations aren't the ones who got lucky and avoided the pattern. They're the ones who built systems specifically engineered to survive it. If you've made it this far, you understand the architecture better than most people who inherit money without ever being told it exists. That's exactly the gap this channel exists to close. Subscribe if you haven't, and if this reframed how you think about long-term family wealth, share it with one person who needs to see it. That's genuinely how this channel grows. None of these 15 principles require you to already be wealthy. Written governance, stewardship framing, controlled failure, human capital. Before financial capital, every one of these is a mindset and a structure before it's a dollar amount. The families who think in centuries didn't start with more money than everyone else. In almost every documented case, they started with a decision to build systems that didn't depend on any one person in any one generation getting everything right. This isn't hidden. It's just never taught. If you want the full architecture, the trusts, the governance documents, the psychology, the failure modes, this channel is building the most complete map of it available anywhere on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next one.